You get the good news. And the first thing you do, instinctively tile, is make it smaller. You round the number down when someone asks. You let people believe the smaller version of your life. You bury good news under a joke. Not lying, Dad, just quietly calculating, before you've noticed, what it might cost you to be seen. That calculation has a name, and it isn't modesty. It's an old instinct built around one very old danger. Standing out from your group could mean getting left behind. Left alone, it doesn't just keep you quiet, Taif. It starts spending your money for you. There are two kinds of people who eventually pull ahead financially. Both know exactly why they're hiding it. Only one of them ever finds out what it's actually costing. Watch what happens the next time it's real. You get the promotion, and somewhere between hearing the title and telling anyone, you edit the story. Maybe you mention the extra responsibility, but skip the raise. Maybe you tell your parents the exact number, then spend the rest of the call minimizing it. Talking about how much more work it is now, how you're not really making that much more after taxes. At work, a colleague notices your new title and says something warm, "Congratulations, that's huge," and your first
Congratulations,
sentence,
that's huge.
No, it's really nothing, seriously. Back is a downgrade. It's not a big deal. I got lucky. Anyone could have gotten it. Watch how fast the compliment turns into an apology. With old friends, it shows up as timing. You'll have good news for weeks before you mention it, waiting for the right moment. That somehow never arrives, because some part of you already knows the room will feel different once they know. So you keep the group chat exactly as it was. You let the old version of your life stay the current one, even after it stopped being true. None of this is modesty.
Oh, is that?
Actual modesty doesn't come with a flinch. This comes with a small, fast discomfort right before the words leave your mouth. The kind of hesitation your body doesn't produce for things that don't matter. That flinch is data. It means some part of you has already run a calculation about what happens if people know, and decided the safer answer is smaller. You can keep explaining this away as modesty, or you can find out what it actually is, and only one of those keeps costing you. Here's what it actually is. Underneath the flinch is a very old kind of math. A running estimate of how far you are, financially, from the people you call your own. Not your net worth in absolute terms. Your position relative to them. That number gets checked constantly, quietly, without you ever deciding to check it. The same way you'd notice if you started standing a foot taller than everyone in a room. Think about how differently the same raise feels depending on who's standing next to you when you get it. Tell a stranger on a plane and it's just a fact, mildly interesting, gone in a minute. Tell the friend who's been in the same job as you for 5 years, and something else. Happens in the room, a small recalibration nobody says out loud. You feel it before you can name it. That's the ledger updating in real time, and it updates for both people, not just you. For most of human history, distance from your group wasn't a bragging right. It was a risk. Falling behind meant needing help. Pulling too far ahead meant looking like you no longer needed the group at all. And a group that no longer feels needed can start to feel less bound to you too. So the mind doesn't file getting ahead financially under achievement first. It files it under distance first. And distance, to an old instinct built around belonging, reads as danger before it reads as good news. This channel calls that pattern affluence camouflage, the reflex to shrink the visible gap between where you are and where your group still is, not out of humility, but out of an instinct trying to keep you inside. The circle, it thinks, is keeping you safe. It's not the same as being modest, and it's not the same as being generous. It's a reflex firing to protect a bond it's afraid the money will break. The exact wiring behind that instinct, how deep it runs, what part of the brain is doing the checking, is still being mapped and worth treating carefully rather than as settled fact. What isn't in question is the pattern itself, because you just watched it play out in your own habits. This instinct doesn't stop at making you quiet. Left alone, it starts making financial decisions on your behalf, and the first one looks nothing like hiding. Here's what that first decision looks like. It looks like generosity. You pick up the check more often than makes sense for your income difference. You send money before anyone asks for it. You quietly cover a shortfall for a friend or a sibling and wave off the thank you, because thanking you would make the gap between you visible, and some part of you would rather pay than let that happen. This isn't the same as being generous by nature. Generosity chooses freely. This is closer to a fee, paid on a schedule you never agreed to keep your place inside a group at the terms it used to run on. Every time the gap widens, from a raise, a bonus, a good year, the fee quietly adjusts too, because the goal was never really to help. The goal was to feel, for one more month, like nothing between you has changed. Sometimes it's smaller than money changing hands at all. It's insisting on the more expensive restaurant, because suggesting the cheaper one might look like you're asking everyone else to keep up with you. It's downgrading your own vacation so a friend's more modest one doesn't feel like a comparison. Each of these choices costs something real, and each one gets justified in the moment as kindness, timing, or simply not being a big deal. Notice where you already do this. Maybe it's the family member you always help first, even when helping first isn't yours to do. Maybe it's the friend group where you're the one who arranges, covers, fronts, absorbs, and never once names that pattern out loud. It rarely looks like a sacrifice from the inside. It looks like being the reliable one. But reliability that only runs in one direction ends up being a burden. Toward keeping the distance small isn't quite the same thing as care. There's a second version of this same instinct. It doesn't look like generosity at all. From the outside, it looks like a mistake. That mistake has a name too, and you've probably made it more than once. It's the negotiation you were qualified to open and didn't. It's the promotion you saw coming and quietly slow-walked, taking longer to apply, hesitating on the interview, leaving just enough gaps that the outcome felt like circumstance instead of a choice. It's the windfall, a bonus, an inheritance, a good sale that somehow doesn't make it into savings, that finds a dozen reasonable places to go until it's gone, and your financial position looks almost exactly like it did before. Or it looks like staying exactly where you are. You've been ready for the next role for longer than you'd admit out loud, but taking it would mean a title that separates you from people you still eat lunch with. A salary conversation you'd rather not have, a visible marker of having moved somewhere they haven't. So you find reasons the timing isn't right. The reasons are real enough on their own. They're just never the whole reason. From the outside, these look like poor judgment, bad timing, a string of unrelated decisions. They aren't unrelated. They're the same belonging protection instinct you met 2 sections ago, just pointed inward instead of outward. Hiding shrinks how big your progress looks to others. Overgiving redistributes it back to the group. Self-sabotage is the instinct, skipping both steps and simply preventing the progress from happening in the first place. Because if it never happens, there's nothing to hide and nothing to give away. This is the same mechanism wearing 3 different outfits. Silence, generosity, and bad luck. All 3 exist to keep the distance between you and your group from growing past whatever your nervous system has decided is safe. And all 3 get treated by the person living them as separate, unconnected quirks of personality, rather than one coordinated response running underneath all of them. None of this requires a dramatic moment. It runs quietly, decision by decision, for years, which is exactly why almost nobody catches it while it's happening. You only tend to notice hiding, overgiving, or holding yourself back, one instance at a time, never as a single pattern with a single cause, though it never gets questioned the way it would if you saw the whole shape of it at once. This pattern has a price, not a vague one, a specific, compounding one that most people never let themselves calculate. Here's the calculation, done honestly instead of avoided. Every negotiation you didn't open compounds. Because the number you don't ask for doesn't just cost you once, it becomes the base that every future raise gets calculated from. Every opportunity you let pass, because taking it would make the distance visible, doesn't just disappear. It takes the version of your career and your net worth that would have come from it. Every year your spending quietly expands to match your group instead of your actual capacity is a year that money wasn't out working for you instead. None of this shows up as a single dramatic loss. It shows up as a life that's noticeably smaller than the one your actual choices could have built. And by the time it's visible, it looks like modest luck, rather than a pattern you could have interrupted at any point. Somewhere in your life, there's probably a version of this you can already name. A cheaper offer accepted because the better one would have meant explaining a bigger number to someone. A move not made. Because your presence, more than your money, was what your group could count on. A business idea shelved, but not because it wasn't good, but because succeeding at it publicly felt like a risk you weren't ready to take. Each of these felt like a small, sensible choice in the moment. Stacked together, they're the actual price tag. Now weigh that against what you're actually afraid of, being seen. And be honest about what that really costs. Because it's almost never what the instinct promises. It's not exile. It's an occasional awkward silence after you mention something good. It's one relative who makes a pointed comment at dinner. It's a friend who needs a week to adjust before the friendship settles back into itself. Uncomfortable? Yes. Survivable? Also yes, in a way that rarely resembles the loss of belonging your nervous system is bracing for. Put the 2 costs side by side and they aren't close. One is a slow, compounding tax on decades. The other is a handful of short, recoverable moments of friction. Most people never do this comparison because the fear arrives instantly, and the math takes a minute, and a minute is longer than the instinct is willing to wait. Most people think their only choice is to hide it or flaunt it. There's a third option, and it's the one that actually protects both the money and the relationships. The third option isn't announcing everything. It isn't posting the number, correcting people's assumptions, or making sure everyone knows exactly where you stand. That's just a louder version of the same performance, chasing status instead of hiding from it, and it isn't what actually fixes any of this. The third option is choosing what you reveal on purpose, instead of having it chosen for you by a reflex you never agreed to. There's a real difference between quiet wealth and affluence camouflage, even though from the outside they can look identical. Someone driving a modest car and living below their means, because that's simply how they've decided to live, is not making a choice. Someone doing the exact same thing because the alternative feels dangerous is running from one. The car looks the same in both driveways. The person behind the wheel is having a completely different internal experience. One calm, one managed. That difference alone changes what happens over the next 20 years. Even if the two people's finances look nearly identical on paper today, you won't always be able to tell which one you're doing in the moment, and that's fine, because the goal was never to eliminate the instinct. It's much older than any single decision you'll make, and it's not going anywhere. The goal is smaller and more useful than that. The next time you feel that flinch, before a compliment, before good news, before a bill you could easily split evenly, pause on it for 1 second longer than usual. Ask what it's actually protecting. Sometimes the honest answer is nothing. It's simply habit, and you can let the news stay for exactly as big as it actually is. Sometimes the honest answer is real. There's a relationship that needs care, a timing that matters, and you get to choose that too, on purpose, instead of by default. That's the whole shift. Not silence, not display. Choice, sitting in the place where reflex used to be. The money was never actually the threat here. It never is. The threat, the one your nervous system has been quietly guarding against this entire time, was losing your place in the room. That fear deserves to be looked at directly instead of managed around forever, because a fear you've actually looked at stops and running the show without your permission. If quiet wealth as a deliberate choice, rather than a defensive one, is something you want to build on purpose, that's its own conversation, one this channel will come back to. There are two kinds of people who eventually earn more than the room they grew up in. One spends the next decade managing that gap in secret. The other stops treating it like something to manage at all.